Hello and welcome to the Leading Lounge. I'm your host, Dr. Justin Dubose. Here in the Leading Lounge, we talk with today's leaders and unpack lessons learned and being learned from a career of leading and communicating in their field. These conversations are designed to be both informal and informative, and we want to equip you with wisdom and tools to empower you as a leader where you are and where you want to be. I think one of the most difficult parts about being an adult in today's world is the transition from season to season. It's often not as smooth as we'd like it to be or as seamless as we see it going in our heads. And in fact, it can be very difficult and cause a bunch of heartache when we don't really know where we're going or how to get there, and we feel like we should. So if you're in one of those seasons, one of those phases, today's guest, Scott Friend, should be a blessing to you. He graduated high school and then went right into the Navy as a Seabee, got into construction there in the Navy. Did that for 7 years and did a couple combat tours and then got out and used his military experience to get into the field of construction. Served in that for a while, went back, had a brief cup of coffee in the Army Reserves, which is where I met him, and then ultimately felt led to go back into construction full-time, and now he's a superintendent and does a great job with the projects that he leads and the folks that he takes care of and he oversees. But he really opens up about these different phases and these different seasons and how the wisdom from one season will carry over into the next and only make you better at the next season. So if you're in one of those transitional phases or you foresee one on the horizon or you know someone that is, make sure and listen closely today to Scott or share this episode with a friend because I know it'll be a blessing to you. But enjoy everything Scott has to say to us today. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Leading Lounge. Got a special guest with me here today, somebody I've known for, let's see, Scott, when would we have first come into contact? Would it have been a couple years ago?
That would have been, probably at least 3 to 4 years ago.
Yeah, 3 to 4 years
Maybe
ago.
more.
So a little while. And a lot has changed in that 3 or 4 years, but you're a busy guy. And so I appreciate your time, being willing to sit down and talk to me a little bit about what you do. I know you're in the construction industry. You got a military background, but I'll let you tell your story, not me. So typically the first question I ask folks, Scott, is just to open up and share a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about your professional journey that got you to where you are today.
I hope you have a lot of time, man. So, no, I appreciate, Justin, you had me on. So I'll give you my elevator pitch, I guess, kind of a little bit about me. So grew up in Northern Kentucky, really close to Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm a son of a veteran as well. So I went into the Navy straight out of high school. Did a couple jobs, actually. Majority of my time I was a Seabee, which is the Naval Construction Battalion. Mm-hmm. Picked up a lot of good knowledge there, got out of the military as a journeyman level carpenter, and I've been in construction ever since, working my way up in the commercial construction environment. Most of the time with a general contractor. I did spend a little bit of time as an operations manager for a big millwork company. And then you and I met because I did another short stint in the service in the reserves, in the chaplain corps. So that was my goal, was to go back to active duty, and that didn't work out. Maybe we'll get into that, but no, I'm glad I did my time on active duty. I'm glad I did my time in the reserves, and still have a ton of respect, obviously, for that community. But I felt, God wanted me where I'm at now, and I think I can have a much bigger impact where I'm at in the field of construction.
Yeah. So now that you're where you are, looking back, do you see it as one long flowing story, or is it like different segments? Like you got this military portion of your life, you got this kind of chaplain corps, seminary portion, construction. You see it as kind of different aspects, or like one long kind of flowing story?
And I think as believers, right, I want to look back and think that I do think that one thing led to another. So there's a flow that I'll probably never understand until I meet the Lord. But I like the way you put it. I do think it's been like sections. So I think there was a time when, I am a veteran, and I'm going to always carry that with me. I'm proud of that heritage, coming from a line of veterans. But that was just a portion of my life. That's not who I am as a whole.
Right.
So that's not Scott, and neither is me being in construction management. So I think there's, I'll call it chapters that make up the novel of my life with my wife. And so, yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good way of looking at it. And it's one of the things that seems to be hard for people is that the transition from one chapter to the next, like the closing of a chapter and the opening of a chapter. And, that's difficult. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you about, you have these different chapters, right? It's kind of the way you put it. So you've got this military chapter, and you did that. How long did you do that all together between the Navy and then the Army Reserve time?
So I did 7 years active, 2 years reserve.
Okay. So 9 years total. So,
yep.
And I think you remember seeing you wearing a deployment patch. So did you have any deployments in that time?
Yeah. So I had 2 deployments when I was on active duty. And I had a big break too between active duty and the reserves too. So I had a 9-year break before I got commissioned.
Okay. Yeah. So you've got Navy experience, you got Army Reserve experience, you've got stateside stuff, you've got deployment stuff, and you certainly got like Navy schools, Navy education, Army education. So you've got that one chapter, and now you're in this construction chapter. And actually, before I ask this question, tell me a little about what you do in the construction world, because the name of the podcast is The Leading Lounge, and I try to grab people who lead in these different areas. So can you just open up just a little bit on what you do? Is it project management, or what do you do in the construction world now?
Yeah, good question. So my title, I'm a superintendent. And so I like to tell people there's what we think we do, or what people think we do is run around with a clipboard and coffee and yell at people all day. And that is absolutely not what we do. I like to think of it as we're like, we lead an orchestra, right? So we're sitting up there making sure all the parts align and making sure that everybody's working together. So we're the ones that are actually on the job site. So the project manager would be our counterpart. They're our partner back in the office. They're messing with the contracts and the money side of things. A lot of more administrative, depending on where you're at, I'll say in the pecking order in the field. So if you're a project superintendent like I am, usually you're overseeing another superintendent or two that's actually in the field, making sure the work gets done. And we're looking at the 30,000-foot view of the project, making sure that those guys have what they need. But we're also still in the field with them, kind of mentoring some of the other field folks. But basically, we're you consider us like the CEO of the field for the project. So we have to guide the ship where it needs to go. And sometimes we're the ones making very difficult decisions. They're not popular, but it's for the better or the best of the job or the client. So like I said, we kind of have to guide everybody towards that ultimate goal of, we can see the job on paper. We know what it's supposed to look like. That building is supposed to look like this rendering that the designers have made, but they expect us to be the ones that are finding the flaws in that design. And I'm not saying the drawings are all jacked up by any means, but we're the technical experts. And in fact, you'll hear me talk about it on my podcast. Sometimes I'll refer to the foreman and superintendents of the trades as like warrant officers, because they're really the technical ones. I'm just looking at them for advice. So I'd be like the battalion commander, and I'm looking at my staff guys going, hey, I need you to be experts and feed me information so I can make the right choices.
Right. No, that's a good analogy. So back to what I was asking you before about moving from chapter to chapter is really difficult and a lot of unknowns. And I'm sure there's some things that carried over from your military experience into construction. I'm sure there's some that didn't. So I wanted to ask you from like a leadership perspective, what about the military and your time there in the service helped prepare you for your leadership roles now in construction? And what didn't it prepare you for? What's new? What's something that you're kind of having to learn as you go and just didn't touch at all on in your 9 years in the service?
Okay, so I'll start with some good things that I carried over. One is that just empathy. I think really caring for our people, even if it's tough love. It's very common in the service is that you love this individual so much, you don't want them to get hurt. And sometimes that might be, I don't want to say being aggressive with them, but being just very direct.
Yeah.
And they know that, especially in the construction industry, it's, you're not yelling and cursing guys out. but you're having to be tough is that, look, I care for you and want you to go home.
Yeah.
So it's very similar to being on a deployment that, hey, look, it's a little different. Obviously, it's more dangerous and you're yelling and screaming, but it's with the best intent. So I think that also I had some good leaders. It's not always like that in the service, right? I was very fortunate to have some amazing commands that I served in. I had some good leadership that they would praise in public and correct in private.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's a cliche, but I still believe it works today. I think it's very disrespectful to dress someone down in public. So I still try to carry that through. I'm not saying I'm the best at that, but yeah, or recognizing them. Like one thing I like to do on my jobs is I give out a challenge coin.
Nice.
So I posted that on my LinkedIn. We recognize the guys as just being an outstanding performer. So I've carried some of those things with me that are very specific to the service, like the challenge coin, and it gives me an opportunity to share what that means and have some fun with it. So as far as the leadership goes, yeah, I think really just caring for the people on the job site like their life depended on it, because sometimes it really does, depending on what kind of construction you got going on. I would say the thing I wasn't ready for is, I don't know if it's necessarily a leadership thing, but I wasn't ready for people not being okay with me trying to go into their lane and help. Because I think as service members, you're part of this big machine. And so I understand your title might be this, but we have the same mission we have to execute. So, you know, bad example for us because we can't carry rifles. But I mean, you know, if you're a supply guy and you're with some infantrymen and you're getting fired at, you're going to pick up that rifle and help fire back.
Right.
So that's not your title.
Right.
So I really wasn't ready for people not being okay with that in not necessarily this industry, but I would say the civilian working world as a whole.
Right.
And that's not everybody, but there was a lot of people that felt as though I was trying to take their position maybe, or, you know, some people might have viewed it as brown nosing, and you're going, man, I'm just trying to help. I got this A-type mentality. I really want to help. Now that's since paid off for me and people know my heart and my intent, but it boggled my mind for the longest time. And you talk about the transition from chapter to chapter. People don't really discuss, you know, when active duty members transition into the civilian world, that's a big part of it. Like, I don't know how this operates. Why don't I understand?
Right.
Which leads to the mental health issues. And it's just, you know, we don't know how to operate in these sectors because there is a lot of cutthroat out there in the civilian world. And it happens in the service too, but that was something I really struggled with. Yeah.
I was reading an article one time about PTSD and what the struggle with soldiers. And I thought it was pretty enlightening. One of the things I read said that a big part of that people don't understand is that when you're in the military, every day is kind of mission driven. And so there's this heightened sense of serving together and there's purpose behind it. And that's, you know, heightened even more in like a combat environment. And so every day you wake up and there's some kind of purpose in it, you know, and it feels, even if it's difficult, it feels worth doing because you're doing it together. And then a big part of the struggle when you transition, you know, out of the service into the civilian world is that for a lot of people, they don't have that kind of DNA in their lives, and it's a job and it's something you do and you do it so you can make money, and the goal is to make more money, or, you know, whatever the thing is, but there's just not that sense of mission. And so, yeah, it's interesting to hear you say not as it relates to PTSD, but just as it relates to leading other people and working together, is that kind of differentiation is real between the military and the civilian world in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And I think, at least speaking from this industry, sometimes we do it to our own detriment where we carry that type A personality into it. And I'm speaking from my own experience. Sometimes we take it a little too far, and you're working these hours that you really shouldn't be, and you're not giving your mental health or your brain a rest, I should say, and you're not caring for yourself physically, and it'll burn you out. Mm-hmm. But if you're on a deployment, you don't have that option to take a break. And so sometimes we have to tell ourselves, hey, man, like there will be a tomorrow, more than likely. We'll get it done. So I, even had my wife have to tell me, it's 8:00 at night. You got to come home, because I'm just still working, just trying to get things done. The guys are off the job site, but I'm going, people are depending on me. So I think it can help, but it can also hinder your progress, because you can only do that for so long before it just destroys you. It just burns you out.
Right.
And we see that in the service as well. Guys going high speed for so long, and it's just it wears you down.
Right. Yeah. So I'm just curious. I have a suspicion, but I want to hear from you on this. So one of the things I like to kind of pry at with people in this podcast and in other areas of life is differentiation between like hard skills and soft skills. So like you picked up certain trades when you went in the Navy, how to engineer, how to build, how to do construction. No doubt that helped you. But you also mentioned like the people aspect, like coming together to help people has served you well. Do you feel like one was more important than the other as far as what you picked up in the military that translates to the civilian world in terms of you picked up some construction skills, some hard skills, but you also picked up some soft skills and, how to deal with people and how to be empathetic and compassionate. You feel like one is more valuable than the other?
I do. And I'm only speaking from my experience, right? So for what
Yeah.
I do specifically, we got to be kind of the Renaissance man. We have to know a little bit about everything, but we have the trades there to be the experts. So while the hard skills did help a lot, I was just speaking to a guy recently that once you get to a point, at least in this industry, that you can kind of have an idea how the building goes together, you're going to do all right. And it takes a while to get there, but I already had that base knowledge of just how things go together. And I know that seems very rudimentary, but I've said that kind of a monkey could do my job sometimes, just the physical aspect of it. But it's the soft skills. You see guys really elevate themselves when they have those relationship skills, when they have that empathy I talked about, or having the humility to step into that other individual's shoes, like a subcontractor that's very upset about something and they're not mad at you, but they might be raising their voice and they're frustrated and going, "Hey, how can I help? What's going on? Help me better understand." So I think from my perspective, I think the soft skills certainly help me more. And you can see the individuals that go further in this industry, they're the ones that they have a high EQ. They really understand people. They might not be the smartest. They might not be the best mathematician or, understand all the engineering, but we know where to find it. So we can find the answers and we can rally the troops together to get things done. So it's that leadership that you speak of, that just really getting people together, excited about that common goal, but showing them you care enough to say, "Hey, I'm wrong. How do I help? What do you need? How can I eliminate your obstacles?"
Yeah. No, that was my suspicion. That's pretty much across the board with everybody I talk to. It's like once you get out in the real world, you find out that the people skills, like you mentioned, EQ over IQ or soft skills over hard skills or whatever labels you want to put on them. Like that's really what sets you apart and makes a difference. That you can rally people together. They know you care about them, and that goes farther than being the most expert, guy, technically proficient guy in construction or whatever the field is. So talking about that, kind of following up to that balance of soft skills and hard skills, wanted to ask you about some advice you might give to other people about how they lead others in a stressful environment. So in your case, in construction, I know you work with a bunch of different people on a bunch of different projects. You mentioned you're kind of like a battalion commander. You've got budget constraints, you've got deadlines, you're working with suppliers, you're working with customers, and the hours, the safety issues, like it all comes together, I'm sure, to be very stressful every single day. And you obviously do it well because you're still doing it and you're doing it on some big projects. So what kind of advice would you give to me or some other people about how do you lead other people well in these stressful environments?
I don't know if I figured that out yet, Justin. But no, one thing I want to say real quick before we move to that question, I don't want to take away from those hard skills or the people that have had those, worked their way up to the journeyman position. I do think that we need those technical experts for sure, but I don't think we put enough emphasis on the soft skills. So I just wanted to get that out there. But man, good question. And I don't know if I'm just trying to be humble here to say I don't have it figured out, but really, I think I want to have fun. I'll put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm at work, I want to enjoy the people I'm around because I see these guys and girls way more than I do my own family. So I don't want to be in this environment that there's a bunch of animosity. So I try to create a culture on my job sites that there's trust. I'll give you an example. Our industry is notorious, we don't do this, and most companies I've worked at do not do this, but they're notorious for creating two different schedules. So they'll give the subcontractors one schedule that's far more aggressive than the one that the client has. I understand why they're trying to do, or what they're trying to do, excuse me, is push hard, look good, but I find that dishonest. I don't make my money that way. Whether the job comes in, 2 weeks to a month early, yeah, that's great, but at what cost?
Mm-hmm.
Am I killing my guys in the field doing that? So a lot of guys aren't used to it when they come on my job, and I think this is what's helped me is I have a lot of repeat trades, guys that I've worked with for a while. Yeah, I'll give you an example. I had one of my electricians. We did a pretty high pressure job together, and I like to give things like basic creature comforts, man. Having a bathroom instead of a porta-john, or
Yeah.
having a break area. The small stuff that we take for granted, and sometimes these guys are treated like they're animals, and I hate that.
Yeah.
I've never agreed with that. And if my guys are using a porta-john, I'm using a porta-john. I don't like to, but if that's all we have, that's what I'm going to use. And so
Mm-hmm.
they've seen that over time. I'm a man of my word. And I had an electrician stand up for me to a newer trade that was just kind of being borderline disrespectful. And he said, "Hey, look, this man, has done a lot for us." And they'll say other GCs don't do stuff like this. And I'm thinking, I'm just doing my job, just the
Mm-hmm.
basics. And that's saying a lot. It's very sad that our industry has set the bar so low in the way they treat some of these guys. I'm just going, man, I'm just treating them with respect as, fellow adult men and women who have families, and I want to see them go home safe. I've gotten some funny looks when I tell people I want you to be bored. They're like, "What do you mean be bored?" And I had heard this somewhere else. I don't know. So I'm sure I'm taking this out of context, but I want people to know exactly what they're doing that day. There's no surprises. There's no things happen in construction every day. We have to make quick, fast decisions, but I don't want them to be stressed out to the point of where they're taking it home,
Right.
being aggressive with their families. So I think we overcomplicate it a lot, but it's really just as silly as it sounds, that golden rule. Like, I don't want somebody yelling at me. So why would I do that to my guys?
Right.
I've got to give my first mentor and boss a lot of credit. His name's Dave Underwood, and he's still in this industry. Just the way he presented himself in meetings and the calm demeanor that he had, I said, that's the guy I want to be like. Because I
Mm-hmm.
had the flip side of that, another superintendent screaming, and I mean screaming at a drywall guy in front of me, and I'm going, what have I done? This is the first project after transitioning out of the service. I'm going, oh my gosh, this is what I have to look forward to. I'm already, my blood pressure's raised, but my boss was just totally calm, didn't really curse much. When he did, we knew something was seriously wrong,
Right.
wasn't aggressive. And, I know what it felt like working for a guy like that. So I said, I want to do that for my guys.
Yeah.
So,
No, when I was doing my dissertation, had to obviously do a ton of reading and research, but part of what I found in digging through all this research on organizations and productivity and communication and all this stuff tied together, leadership, was that if you have a climate of care and trust where people know that, like you were saying, you care about them, you care about their safety, you care about their family life, their work-life balance, their well-being, even get them creature comforts that are just nice to have. It actually increases productivity, and it increases retention, and it increases all these other things that you're trying to increase. But when people know that, look, I'm going to work in a stressful environment, but I know that my boss cares about me. I know that he's trying to help me. He's doing everything he can to make there be no surprises so that I, know what I'm getting myself into. It goes a long way. And I'm sure you found that those people are more productive for you when they have that sense of security and trust.
yeah. And I think a really good leadership skill to learn is really put the power in the hands of your people. So by that, I mean, there's some really good videos out there that discuss this. You'll probably know better than I do. There's an older video out there. When I say older, it's probably only like 8 years old, but there's a video out there where there was a naval, I want to say he was a submarine commander, and he really put a lot of the power with the chiefs. and like let them do their
Mm-hmm.
thing, so they didn't have to always ask him for permission to do everything. So that's one thing that I've used with my guys is that, hey, look, some of these guys are 20 years my senior. And I'm going, this dude's been doing this a lot longer than I have. And
Right.
so there's this mutual respect there that even though I have to make the call at the end of the day, I'm going to trust their decision. You talk about, people trying to change these things, trying to create more retention. And I think everybody's searching for this magic pill. Hey, what's gonna do this? Oh, well, let's give them a pizza lunch, or like
Right. Yeah.
let's give them all these extra things. And I'm going, man, people just want to be treated like people.
Yeah.
They just want to go to work and be respected and have an environment of trust. Small things like on our job. I'm really anal about the job being clean. I want it to be just, I don't like working in a dirty environment.
Mm-hmm.
And the guys appreciate that too. And I'm not the one pushing a broom anymore. They do this on their own, but it's neat to see some of the trades come together when I get the new trade that hasn't worked with us before, and they might not be the cleanest, and the other trades are telling them, hey man, you need to clean this stuff up. It's not me having to do it. So I'm kind of putting all this power in their hands
Yeah.
and just sort of checking in from time to time, which ultimately makes my life a lot easier and my job a lot easier and less stressful.
Yeah. No, for sure. I think that's huge. And I'm sure communication is a big part of that, like how you talk to them, how you listen to them, communicate empathy and stuff like that with them. So one of the questions, Scott, I love to ask everyone, one of the focuses of this podcast and a particular interest of mine is just communication and talking to people from all these different fields and hearing things that they've learned. So I'll ask you if you could tell me about a time, some particular time, if one comes to mind, when you failed at communicating, right? So you try to do it well, you try to build trust, but inevitably you drop the ball sometimes. So what'd you learn from that failure, and how did it change how you communicate with people after that, if it did?
Oh man, I have a lot of examples. Lots of failure, man. That's the best way we learn in this
That's
industry
exactly
for sure.
right.
But I'll give you an example. There's a lot of slang words for certain things within our industry, what they might call a piece of equipment or a piece of material. And sometimes I might not know what they're talking about, or vice versa, especially because I've traveled, I've done construction overseas outside of the military. So I've learned all these things. And I've done construction on the East Coast and now in Texas. So I might be trying to explain something to an individual and they're looking at me like, just this blank stare going, what is this dude talking about?
Yeah.
And the flip side of that too is I'll have guys that might be a little newer and they'll say, hey man, you know that thing over there? Well, it's not working. I'm going, what are you talking about? What thing over where? And so I don't want to say you're like dumbing it down at all, but you have to be very specific in your
Yeah.
communication, especially when you're working in, hundreds of thousands of square feet in a building and hundreds of openings, doors, and all this different areas of the building. You have to be very specific on what this one small area, this 1 square foot of that building, the issue that you have. Take a picture. Pictures speak very loudly.
Mm-hmm.
You can point out what you're trying to explain, because I don't want to look like an idiot in front of my guys, but I'll say, hey, I don't understand this. And that humility is a big part of that communication too. That,
Right.
hey man, this is not right. I don't know why, but this isn't meshing. And so I think a lot of it is just, again, I don't want to say dumbing it down, but making it simplified. That works both ways, but also being very direct. So there's one example I have where I had a guy working for me. I was training him, and I was starting to get frustrated because there were some things he just wasn't getting done. I'm going, what in the world? Like, I thought I explained everything correctly, but I didn't. I never sat down, shame on me, and literally said, here's what you have to do week after week. I never did that.
Yeah.
Because I had this unspoken expectation. Maybe I'm getting into pastoral counseling now a little bit, right? We're talking about marriage, but the same thing goes on the job site. I had this unspoken expectation of this individual that, well, they should know this. I know that, but I'm the one training him.
Mm-hmm.
I failed him in that regard. So I couldn't be upset with him. So I sat down and said, okay, here's what you have to do week after week. And we never had an issue after that. And I have to give credit to my wife, because she's the one that said, have you ever just sat down and explained to him what his job is? I'm like, well, I think,
Yeah.
trying to make excuses, and I didn't. And so that was and this is recent. So, I mean, this was a big aha moment in my life. And I'm learning all those things, but a lot of times it's just slowing down, really thinking about, we're going so fast. So sometimes I just have to slow down, really think about the message I'm trying to deliver and ensure they've got every piece of the puzzle and nothing's left unturned. I say, do you understand? You know what I need? Like I repeat it back again. Do you have any questions? Ask them. Do you know what you need? And inevitably there's always a question that comes with it. So it's just that very thorough communication in this industry. And the part of that is we're contractors. So we could end up in court over our communication.
Yeah.
I had a guy I worked with that said if it can be read, whether that's a text message, email, what have you, it can be read in court. And I took that to heart.
Yeah.
So we have to be very careful what we say on emails. We have to be very careful how we word things like RFIs, how we do our daily reports. So communication is a big deal in this industry. And it's kind of, I don't want to say it's sad. That's where we've gotten because there are no more handshake deals anymore. Those days are long gone.
Right.
But it all centers around communication and relationships.
Yeah.
So I think I over-explained my answer, but
No. I mean, you're highlighting what you're talking about.
Perfect.
No unmet expectations. I was thinking about a story I heard about Vince Lombardi, famous Packers coach, and how at some point, I don't know if he did this throughout his career, if it only happened later after he'd been coaching for a while, but he'd get these professional football players in, and they'd come in, and of course they're the best in the world at what they do. The Packers they're winning every year. And his first meeting of the year, he'd gather them up, and he'd have a football in his hands, and he'd be like, "Gentlemen, this is a football." And they were like, "You're going to tell us about the plays we're running?" He's like, "No, not yet. We're starting right here. This is a football. Like, let's make sure we all know this is a football." And like starting at square one of just like, all right, let me make sure we're all on the same page, down to the very, very basics. So I think it's the same thing you're talking about. Like. And in one sense, you feel like you shouldn't have to, but then after a while, you're like, you know what? I want to set these people up for success. Let's start at the ground floor and build it up from there.
Yeah, and I think when you have the brand new guy, we call him the greenhorn, right? The brand new dude that really doesn't know much yet. They might be an apprentice. Sometimes they're just embarrassed to ask questions. So you have to over-explain things just to make sure, like, hey, I want to make sure you're picking up what I'm putting down, dude.
Yep.
I've heard or experienced, and I've seen a lot of variations of this, something similar to that story you just shared. I can remember, this is probably 12 years ago, we had a big superintendent's meeting in the company that I was working with at the time. They had a couple guys stand up, and they had a loaf of bread, a knife, a jar of peanut butter, and a jar of jelly. And I've seen this, they've done it a bunch on the internet, on YouTube and stuff like that too. But the point was, one of the superintendents had to tell the guy that was standing up there, which he was in on it, they had to explain to him how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And so inevitably they would say something like, well, put the peanut butter on the bread. And what did he do? He took the jar of peanut butter and placed it on the loaf of bread. And go, no, spread it around. And he's rubbing the jar of peanut butter around the loaf of bread. And so, but it progressed and got worse, and it was funny, but it was that explanation of, no,
that's so good.
We might understand what we're saying, but you really have to simplify it and ensure this guy knows exactly what you're trying to get across. Because if we don't do that, you think this is going to create a lot more time just to explain it. But if it gets screwed up, you're going to take even more time trying to do some rework and fix the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Take the time on the front end, be patient, be humble, explain it, ask for questions, and go about your way.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's a great example. I actually haven't seen that video or heard of that video, but that's perfect because it's taking a task that everybody in theory knows what to do, but you're starting from square one. So that's great, man. That's a great example.
Yep.
Well, I'll leave you with this question. I just wanted I know you started a podcast recently, and I wanted to give you a chance. I joke with people, when I talk about my podcast, I'm like, I want to give you a chance to share with the 7 people who listen to my podcast about the podcast you've got going on. But just to share a little bit about the podcast you've got, what it is, where folks can find it, and that kind of thing.
Well, you got one up on me because I think I have like six, maybe. Um, so yeah, thanks for asking. So I recently started the Construction Veteran podcast, and there's a couple of different reasons how and why that started. As an industry, we're facing a major issue where a lot of the older folks are retiring out, and we just don't have a lot of people hungry to get into this industry and learn trades and do what I do, become a superintendent or project managers. And I think people have a very skewed idea of what construction is like and all the jobs that are actually available to them within the industry, whether that's what I do, working on the owner's side as a representative for the owner, consultants, schedulers, all these different things. And obviously, as a veteran, I have a passion and heart for them being successful. So we talked about the chapters of the book. That's a very difficult transition, especially if that's what you've done, your early adult years, and it's all you ever known. Sometimes it's folks' only job,
Right.
At 17, 18. So they do 4 years in, and they're kind of kicked out and sent on their merry way after some checks in the boxes of, well, here's how you write a resume. And we could do a better job at that. And so I'm looking at these two things thinking, well, why don't we combine what a lot of people in our generation and the younger generations are doing? They're listening to podcasts, they're watching YouTube, they're watching TikTok and Instagram. Why can we not use that as a medium to get people exposed to the industry and excited about what's out there? So I take veterans and supporters of veterans within the industry. Some of them are CEOs, some of them are high up in the chain, some of them are brand new, and we talk about their story, where they're from, what they've done, how, kind of similar to what you're doing. How did that their military background assist them what they're doing now? And you come to realize that, one, this is a very easy industry to get into, and two, you don't have to have an engineering degree, you don't have to have a background in construction to get into this. The lessons that were taught, case in point, leadership, like we're talking about now, it carries over very well. And so I feel a little selfish because I get to enjoy all these just awesome people I get to talk to, kind of like you do. You meet these wonderful people that I might not have had access to, and they just inevitably introduce, oh, you should talk to this guy and you should talk to this girl. And it's just really neat. And to see how passionate they are as well for that mission is just super encouraging to me. So it's the Construction Veteran Podcast. I'm on all the platforms. I've been doing this. Let's see, I got off active duty in 2011, so 12 years now. So I'm mid-level in my career. I think I know enough to be dangerous, and so I kind of share my experiences. But it's just really neat to see our fellow veterans succeed within this industry, and hopefully, I can encourage that guy or girl that's just unsure what they want to do when they get out, realize, hey, there's a pretty viable pathway out there for me.
Yeah, no, and oh, by the way, you can make great money. So my grandfather grew up on a farm in Central Texas, basically, and graduated, worked on the farm, and was like, I'm out of here, man. I'm not spending my life doing this. Went and joined the Army, and they trained him to be a tank mechanic. So he did that. He was over in Germany for a while. Did that, got out, got a job with Caterpillar, and worked because he picked up these skills in the military, in the Army as a tank mechanic. He worked his way all the way up to be the vice president of a big company and retired very comfortably. I mean, they had a house there in the hill country in Texas that they just sold recently, but man, it was this gorgeous house right on top of the hill overlooking Lake Travis. And the guy was a high school grad who happened to join the Army, and they taught him how to be a tank mechanic, and he worked his way up, to be the VP of a company. And so, to your point, like the industry, even as an outsider looking in, having family members who've done it, it's like, man, what a great way to go, and the transition from the military to that seems to be pretty natural to me. So I think it's a good thing what you're doing, and I hope it really takes off and does well. And as an extra plug, the one episode I listened to, I think it was your first episode, and you've told me I've looked ahead to some of your other guests, like really, really high caliber people that you're interviewing. So it's good stuff, man. Hope it really does well for you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That story about your grandpa, I wish I could say that that was kind of a one-off, but man, you just see a lot of success
Yeah.
from a lot of just good people. And you really can't judge a book by its cover, because that dude walking home with the dirty overalls is probably going home to a very nice home.
Yep.
You know, I've seen it change a lot over the last 10 years where, and you'll hear me talk about this on my podcast too, but it's just that I'm encouraged to see that the trades are finally becoming more valued.
Yeah.
So people need the Renaissance man, the man that knows how to take care of his household, and to fix the issues and support his family. And I think it's coming back.
Yeah, I think so. I've told my kids, I've got as much education as a human being can have. I've got a terminal degree. And if I were them, I don't think I would do that. I think I would go get me a skill and a trade that's valuable that people pay you for. You got basically no debt, and you can basically hang up your shingle and people will pay you, because you have a valuable skill that everyone sees the value in. So I think it's great, man.
Speaking of the degrees, I think I've told you before, if the Army did not require a master's, I would have never gone back to school. I
same here.
hated every second of it.
Same here.
Just because that's not my thing. I'm a hands-on guy. I just love being around people. So yeah, I think I'd tell my kids the same thing. Go pick up a skill. We're making sure we try to do that as well. And I tell younger guys, hey, look at the trades, man. It's you can make a lot more money now within a trade than you could 10 years ago. That's for sure. Because it's certainly needed. Yeah. And people are retiring out, like I said, and we need that new crop of people.
Yep. Now that's good, man. Well, like I said before, I appreciate your time. I consider you a friend, not only in name, but
wow. Womp womp.
But no, I really respect what you do, and that's why I reached out to you to be on the podcast, and grateful our paths crossed, even if it was for you a short time on the Army Reserve stuff, and praying that God continues to put you in, good positions of leadership, because you got a lot of wisdom, man, that comes from experience and even, like you said, from failure, learning and seeing what right looks like. So pray for continued success for you, man, with your family there and your podcast and everything else, and really appreciate you sharing some time with me tonight.
Thanks, Justin, man. You're a brother to me, and I appreciate that, and I'm happy our paths cross as well.
All right, well, thank you guys for listening to another episode of The Leading Lounge, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for joining us today. The Leading Lounge is brought to you by Communicate to Care, where we are building better leaders by building better people. For more information, visit us online at www.communicatecare.com. This is your host, Dr. Justin Dubose, and we'll see you next time, right here in the Leading Lounge.